Hello, welcome to My 21st Century Classroom podcast, which is being broadcasted today, October 1st, 2017, from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Kristin, and today I'll be your host. How many of our listeners today are educators who have had to wake up sleeping students throughout what you thought was an exciting lesson that took you hours to prepare? And on the other hand, how many students out there have struggled to stay awake during class because, well, frankly, you're bored? Well, today we are going to discuss that struggle, the struggle for educators to engage students and also students' views on engagement. Engagement tools are sought after by educators, and without being engaged, students do not learn much, if anything. The more knowledge educators have on engagement, the more successful their classroom will be. So turn up the volume if you want to hear if you are really a part of an engaging classroom or not. Today we are going to break down engagement into 4 short parts: its definition, its link to learning, its description, and finally, examples of engaging activities for the classroom. Welcome to Part 1, Defining Engagement.
Engagement is when I have fun in class.
I feel most engaged in class when we work together.
When I'm participating and when everybody else is participating.
To be paying attention.
When I'm not sleeping in class.
What you just heard was a few high school students giving their definitions of engagement. Most educators think of engagement in the same way, basically having the students' basic attention and participation or sticking the students in front of a computer. However, Dr. Philip Schlechte defines in more detail and provides more for educators to think about when deciding if their students are actually engaged or just appearing like they are. Dr. Schlechte passionately believes that the core business of schooling is to create engaging schoolwork for students. As the founder and CEO of the Schlechte Center for Leadership and School Reform, he and his staff help educators around the country implement permanent positive change at the district, school, and classroom levels. He is a former public school educator, administrator, and faculty member at the University of North Carolina and author, so his explanation of engagement definitely has credibility and is worthwhile to consider. While most of us just think of engagement levels as asleep, awake, or participating, Dr. Schlechte gives 5 specific levels of engagement. Number 1 is rebellion, which is diverted attention and no commitment. Rebellion to me is when the student is going out of his or her way to not pay attention to you. Number 2 is retreatism, which is no attention and no commitment. So to me, this is when the student is asleep or daydreaming. Number 3 is ritual compliance, meaning that students have low attention and low commitment. This categorizes those students who at least give off the appearance that they are paying attention, but give minimal effort. Number 4 is strategic compliance, meaning that there is high attention but low commitment. So these are the students who pretty much fool teachers that they are paying attention, but they really aren't focusing or committed. And lastly, the aim of all educators is to reach number 5, engagement, high attention and high commitment. This is when, according to probably every research article I've ever seen, learning genuinely takes place. Now that we've defined engagement, let's move on to part 2, to briefly discuss how research shows engagement is linked directly to learning. Most educators have seen research article after article that links engagement to learning, and if you haven't, do a quick Google search to see the multitudes of proven studies. In studies that Dr. Schlechte and others have done, it has been proven time and time again that student engagement is the product of motivation and active learning. Furthermore, if you ask any student, they will tell you that being engaged is key to them learning and enjoying learning. I don't think any educator would or could disagree that engagement is linked directly to learning, but what educators really need to consider is what engagement actually looks like in the classroom. In our third part of this podcast, we are going to do our best to describe engagement. Well, if students are awake and off social media, then congratulations, half of the battle has been won. But what does it really look like and feel like to move beyond ritual compliance to high attention and high commitment, aka engagement? The following descriptions come from educators all over the country who used an online Padlet to post their opinions of what engagement looks like in the classroom. Lisa from Georgia posted that when discussing a piece of literature, if students talk and even argue with each other over a character's motives, for example, and ask each other questions that deepen the conversation, that's when she feels like there is true engagement. Maria from Texas believes that students remember the teachers and activities that really speak to what students need, love, or are curious about, not test prep packets. So engagement means classroom interaction that goes beyond standardized testing and independent worksheets. Regina from North Carolina states that teachers need to give choice as much as possible. Also, if students know that you care about them, then they will trust that what you want them to learn is important. Sam from California wrote that student-centered learning is at the heart of engagement. Lectures should be short, and examples and student involvement are central to an engaging classroom. Based on this feedback, engagement can be described as a classroom that includes the interests of students, relevance to students' lives, topics that students are passionate about, and lastly, genuine care for students. If these characteristics are found in your classroom, then good for you, because most likely that means that you are an engaging teacher or a student being engaged. If that description doesn't fully parallel what's going on in your classroom, don't worry. Here in Part 4, we are going to discuss what types of activities promote engagement. I asked several high school students what classroom activities stuck out to them as the most engaging, and here is what they had to say.
I like to have open-ended classroom discussions and have projects where we can do not whatever we want, but we have choice.
I liked it when we did the chalk talk on the board. Instead of saying our thoughts out loud, we wrote them down.
When technology is involved.
When we use technology and like our phones.
When we talk about things that are relevant to a teenager's life.
I feel engaged in class when we work in groups.
Hearing from students may be one of the best ways for teachers to learn about the activities that are truly engaging. So my first suggestion to educators is ask your students. Or if you're a student, tell your teacher. There are plenty of ideas on the internet so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you can tweak them to fit you and your students' needs. One of the most helpful sites I found was a list of 14 activities that promote engagement. This list was based off of a webinar by reading specialist Stacy Hurst. I'm going to highlight a few of my favorites, but the full list and webinar can be found on www.readinghorizons.com. Stand up, sit down. Teachers can use this activity to help students differentiate between any two categories. For instance, when teaching common nouns and proper nouns, give an example and have students stand up if it's a common noun or stay seated if it's a proper noun. This is a great way to see how much of your class is actually grasping the material, and it gets students' blood flowing to keep them alert and engaged. One word splash. Although this activity is one that most teachers might be unfamiliar with, it's a very effective way to help students process what they've already learned. After explaining new material, ask your students to write down just one word to sum up the material. Now, you might think that this writing of one word is overly simplistic, but it actually requires higher processing skills that will help your students digest their learning. Gallery walk. This is another great activity that will help keep your students engaged and their energy level high. After having your students write or draw the responses, have a gallery walk and allow your students to look around the room and see other students' responses. Because students seek other students' approval, they will put more effort into this exercise. In addition, some great technology resources are www.noredink.com, where students can have personalized and fun grammar lessons, activities, and quizzes. And also www.newsela.com is a great resource for reading comprehension, where students can pick the latest news articles on any topics that they want and have a short quiz where teachers can gauge reading comprehension. You'll notice that these activities include time for students to reflect or talk to others, to move around, to include technology, and not just sit and listen to a teacher lecture the entire class. I'm looking forward to trying some of these strategies in my own classroom, and I hope you are too. We've learned today that engagement involves relevance to students' lives, student choice, a mix of technology, and a caring environment, and time for students to reflect while possibly talking to others and moving around the room, and an overall student-centered approach, among other things. If you want to read more about engagement, we recommend the book entitled The Highly Engaged Classroom by Dr. Marzano, where he discusses applying the latest research in tangible ways into your classroom. Educators and students, please feel free to share in the comments section under this podcast different thoughts, descriptions, strategies, and activities that you have found to be engaging. And educators, let us know the result of implementing any of these ideas that we've discussed today. I'll leave you with this quote: "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I will remember, involve me and I will learn." Well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks again for listening, and tune in later for Yvette Sands' follow-up vodcast of My 21st Century Classroom, where she'll be tackling an even more challenging scenario for educators and students alike: engagement in the online virtual classroom.